Today, I'd like to reflect with you regarding what loyal love is about. There is a legend contained in the Talmud, the central text of rabbinic Judaism, and the primary source of Jewish ceremonial law, that records a fascinating story of a young Gentile man who was interested in converting to Judaism. So he approaches Rabbi Shammai, a Jewish scholar who is actually a contemporary of Jesus, and he promises to convert if Shammai could teach him the Torah while the young man stood on one foot. Now, Shammai was not the kind of teacher who suffered fools wisely, so he whooped the youth upside his head with a stick that he happened to be holding. Now, Shammai must have been thinking, who is this guy who thinks that the depth and breadth of the Torah could be reduced to a few words? That's impossible. So, whap. Now, undaunted, the young man went to Rabbi Hillel, who generally favored a more lenient interpretation of the law, and offered him the same challenge. Hillel was a lot more patient with him and said, "What is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow man. This is the entire Torah. The rest is commentary. Now go and learn it." Shortly after, the man converted to Judaism. Synthesizing the Torah was a sort of enterprise that rabbis frequently did. There are traditionally 613 laws in the Torah, which can be found in the Holiness Code in the book of Leviticus. A 3rd century rabbi, Semlai, taught that they represented 365 prohibitions given to Moses, which corresponded to the days of the year. And there are 248 positive commandments that corresponds to the limbs of the human body. Semlai taught that they could be reduced to certain basic principles of doing right and keeping justice. Rabbi Akiva of the 1st century reduced the laws to just one: love thy neighbor. In today's gospel reading, Jesus receives a similar challenge like the one posed by the young Gentile man. A scribe asks Jesus which of the commandments is the greatest. The challenge is not simply to come up with the most important commandment with some kind of ranking system, but to reveal the lens by which the others, and indeed life itself, may be interpreted. Jesus responds by quoting the Shema: "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength." Jesus then adds, quoting Leviticus 19, verse 18, "The second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself." One scribe was delighted in hearing this, noting that love is worth more than all burnt offerings and sacrifices. So Jesus has given us the great commandment, and we should consider these two commandments as one, for love by its very nature is unitive. To love God and not to love human beings is just not possible. And to imagine that one could love human beings without cultivating a love of God, the very source of love, is to make a colossal mistake. The evangelist John brings the two together in his first letter. "Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love." St. Paul writes in his letter to the Romans that loving another fulfills the law, because love is the one thing that is eternal. Brothers and sisters, since God is love, and that's not an attribute, but is God's very nature, then love is both the means by which we attain union with God and is the principal expression of what it means to be a Christian. We are hardwired to be in communion with God. We yearn to participate in his very being because we are made in the image of God. We realize that deepest desire by operating as God does. Namely, we give ourselves away in sacrificial giving, which St. John Paul II calls the law of the gift. And as we do that, we truly manifest that we are indeed followers of Christ. As the contemporary praise song puts it, they will know that we are Christians by our love by our love. Yes, they will know that we are Christians by our love. In short, Christian life is faith working through love. One of the most difficult challenges to our faith is to love those who are very difficult to love, especially those who are the bane of our existence and may be actively persecuting us. During these times, we have to remind ourselves that love is not merely an emotional affection, but is a choice. Love of God and love of neighbor expresses itself as service, generosity, and care. And as Jesus said to Peter, if you love me, feed my sheep. And this can only be done through grace. Through deep and abiding prayer, being grounded in God helps us to recognize that God's grace falls on the just and the unjust alike. Why? Every human being, even our worst enemy, has intrinsic value because they too are made in the image of God and are therefore a beloved child of God. Such recognition will change our spiritual posture and behavior towards them. So during the week, I encourage you to think of someone in your life who is difficult to love. Then hold that person daily in prayer for 1 week and see what transpires. You may not become friends, and your aversion to that person may not vanish, but you may start to love him or her, and that's what counts. Amen.